Night settled slowly over the quiet hills of Georgia, wrapping the Hale estate in a soft, melancholic glow. Inside the mansion, silence had become a second skin, the kind of silence that didn't bring peace, but reminded everyone that something had once been broken and never healed. For 12 long years, no one had heard a laugh echo through those halls. No one had seen a single smile curve the face of the man who owned it all. Jonathan Hale had everything money could protect, but nothing that could save his heart. And yet, on the same night, he locked himself away again, believing that healing was for other people, not him. A young woman walked through his front gates carrying nothing but a cleaning bag, worn shoes, and a faith strong enough to bend darkness. Her name was Hope, and she had no idea that heaven had just sent her into the life of a man who hadn't felt warmth in over a decade. As she crossed the marble floors for the first time, she felt something heavy in the air, a sorrow so deep it almost whispered. But Hope didn't run from brokenness. She prayed through it, and somewhere in the upper balcony, hidden behind shadows, Jonathan paused when he heard her voice. Steady, humble, whispering a prayer not for herself, but for whoever lives here and carries a silent pain. He froze. No one had prayed for him in 12 years. That single prayer, fragile, trembling, sincere, did something no therapist, no medication, no distraction, no amount of wealth could do. It cracked the marble around his heart. And the story you are about to hear is the story of how a maid's simple faith began to melt the soul of a millionaire who believed he was beyond redemption. A story of a man who thought he'd never smile again, until God used the most unexpected person to remind him what it felt like to be alive. If you're watching this now, stay until the end, because sometimes God hides your own healing inside someone else's miracle. Subscribe for more redeemed heart stories that touch the soul. Jonathan Hale's mansion stood at the edge of a sleepy Georgia town, where Spanish moss hung from old oaks and the air smelled faintly of rain. People drove past the iron gates and lowered their voices, as if even their words could disturb the ghosts inside. Locals said the house had everything money could buy and nothing a heart really needed. They whispered that its owner hadn't smiled in 12 years. And tonight, a small white car pulled up to those gates carrying a woman who still believed God could change anything. Hope Martinez parked with a shaky breath, fingers tapping the worn steering wheel her father had once fixed with duct tape. Her heart beat fast, but not from fear of the job. She'd cleaned enough houses to know her way around dust and secrets. This felt different because something in her spirit was strangely alert, as if heaven itself had nudged her here. She whispered, "Okay, Lord. If you open this door, I'll walk through it." Then she straightened her simple blouse, grabbed her cleaning bag, and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The iron gate slid open with a slow mechanical groan, controlled by a guard who barely lifted his eyes from his phone. He glanced at her name badge, mumbled, "New maid, right? Temporary contract?" Hope nodded, offering a polite smile that wasn't returned. He buzzed her in and pointed toward the front entrance as if giving directions to a delivery. People like her were always passing through. No one expected them to stay long enough to matter. The drive up to the mansion felt like walking into another world. Neatly trimmed hedges lined the path, and soft garden lights cast a golden glow on stone statues that looked too serious to belong in a yard. The house itself was wide and imposing. Tall white columns stretched toward a sky turning purple with dusk. Hope's sneakers sounded almost too loud against the marble steps leading to the main door. She paused at the top, took one deep breath and whispered, "Use me here, even if no one knows my name." Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with polished wood and old money. The foyer was so large her voice would probably echo if she dared to speak. A grand staircase swept upward, carpeted in deep navy that swallowed footsteps. Crystal lights sparkled from a chandelier above, but somehow the house still felt dim. It was the kind of beauty that impressed the eyes and left the heart untouched. A woman in her 50s marched toward Hope, clutching a clipboard like a shield. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled into a tight bun that didn't invite questions. "You must be Hope," she said, more statement than welcome. "I'm Mrs. Whitaker. I run the staff here. We keep things quiet, efficient, and invisible." "Understood?" Hope nodded gently and replied, "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to help, not to be seen." "Mrs. Whitaker scanned her from head to toe as if measuring how much trouble she could be. "The Hales don't like noise, especially Mr. Hale," she continued, lowering her voice slightly. "He works odd hours, doesn't like being disturbed, and doesn't appreciate small talk." She hesitated, then added, "He's been through a lot. Just do your job, keep your head down, and you'll be fine." Hope's heart softened at the unspoken pain behind those words. They walked through the main corridor, their footsteps muffled by thick rugs. Family pictures lined the hallway, but most frames faced slightly away, like someone had brushed past them in a hurry. Hope's eyes caught a photo of a younger Jonathan, smiling with a woman beside him and a little boy between them. The joy in that photo felt so real, it almost stung. Before she could look longer, Mrs. Whitaker cleared her throat and kept walking. "You'll start with the guest wing, 3rd floor." Mrs. Whitaker said, steering her toward a side staircase. "Make sure everything's spotless. Mr. Hale has meetings here sometimes, though not as often lately." Her voice softened a fraction, almost like a confession. "This house used to be full of people. Now it's mostly full of echoes." She shook the thought away before it became emotion and pushed open a door. Hope entered the guest room and let out a quiet breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It was beautiful. High ceilings, soft cream walls, a big bed with crisp white sheets that looked barely used. She set her cleaning bag down and took in the faint smell of lemon and linen. For a moment, the silence pressed in, heavy and familiar, the same way it had after her father passed away. She knew the feeling of a house that had seen too many tears. She began her work with practiced hands, dusting surfaces, smoothing pillowcases, aligning frames. As she wiped the nightstand, her fingers brushed against a small forgotten Bible, its leather cover worn at the edges. Someone had pushed it slightly behind the lamp as if they were hiding a part of themselves they weren't ready to face. Hope picked it up, thumb brushing across the imprint of years of use and years of avoidance. Her heart stirred with a tenderness she knew was God's. She didn't open it, but she held it for a moment, bowing her head. "Whoever put this here," she whispered, "you see them, Lord. You see what they lost. Touch them again." Her words were soft, barely louder than a breath, but the sincerity in them filled the room. She placed the Bible back where she'd found it, though she turned it just enough so it was no longer hidden. Then she smiled faintly, as if expecting heaven to do the rest. Across the house, on the opposite wing, Jonathan Hale moved like a shadow in his own home. He had spent the day in video conferences, reviewing numbers he barely cared about anymore. Spreadsheets, contracts, projections, all the things that used to excite him, now blurred together into static. He closed his laptop with a tired exhale and rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar ache behind his eyes. The world thought he was powerful. He mostly felt exhausted. He stepped into the hallway and stared down over the balcony that overlooked the foyer. From up there, the chandelier lights reflected in his distant gaze, but no warmth reached his expression. His jaw was tight, shoulders tense, every line of his body carved by years of living in defense mode. He had mastered the art of functioning without feeling. It was easier than admitting how much had been taken from him. As he leaned against the railing, he heard Mrs. Whitaker's muffled voice giving instructions somewhere below. Another staff member, he guessed. They came and went. He rarely bothered to learn their names. His eyes drifted to a family portrait on the wall opposite, the one he kept meaning to take down but never did. His chest tightened, and with one swift motion, he turned away before the memory could complete itself. He walked toward his office where the ghosts were at least predictable, but as he passed the 3rd floor hallway, a sound reached him that didn't belong to the house's usual emptiness. It wasn't a vacuum or the clinking of dishes or the shuffle of feet trying not to be heard. It was a voice, quiet, humble, carrying a tenderness that made him slow his steps without meaning to. He moved closer, the polished floor cold under his bare feet, stopping just short of the slightly open guest room door. The words were faint, but they folded into the cracks in his armor. "And if the person who sleeps here has forgotten how to hope," the voice said gently, "remind them that you haven't forgotten them." Hope's accent colored her English with a soft rhythm, like a gentle melody that didn't need music. "There are things money can't fix, but you still can. Heal what they don't talk about, comfort what they hide, Jonathan's hand gripped the door frame, anger flickering for a second, not at her, but at the God she dared to mention. Yet beneath the anger, something else stirred, something he wasn't ready to name. He considered walking in, shutting her down, reminding her she was there to clean, not to pray. The old Jonathan would have done it without thinking. Controlled every variable, corrected every step out of line, but he stayed rooted to the spot, like his feet had forgotten how to move. He listened as the silence stretched and her voice faded into the soft rustle of her work. His heart, numb for so long, felt a tiny, almost painful throb. Hope, unaware that her whispered prayer had found its first listener, kept cleaning with peaceful focus. She hummed a worship chorus under her breath, something about light breaking through night. Every so often she would glance at the door, sensing something but not knowing what. In her spirit, a quiet impression stirred. You are not here by accident. She chose to believe it, even if she couldn't see why yet. Jonathan finally forced himself to step back, jaw clenched as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. He walked away faster than necessary, as though outrunning a memory, a prayer, and a God he didn't trust anymore. But the words she'd spoken refused to leave his mind, echoing like a song stuck on repeat. Forgotten how to hope. You haven't forgotten them. He shut his office door a little harder than usual, but the echo of her prayer walked in with him. As night deepened outside and crickets began their chorus beyond the manicured lawn, the house settled into its usual quiet. Yet something had undeniably shifted, not in the walls, but in the unseen atmosphere wrapping them. For the first time in years, someone had dared to invite heaven back into the Hale estate, and somewhere between a hidden office and a guest room, a battle had just begun over a millionaire's tired soul. Hope didn't know it yet, but her simple faith had already touched a heart that hadn't truly felt in 12 long years. Jonathan didn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the house too quiet, and his mind too loud. Every time he blinked, he heard her voice again. Not her words, but the sincerity in them. It unsettled him more than any nightmare had in years. Hope's prayer replayed like a fragile echo, refusing to die. He got up before dawn, pacing in the dim light of his room, trying to shake the tension in his chest. He told himself it was irritation. He hated when staff crossed personal boundaries. But deep down, he knew irritation wasn't supposed to feel like warmth, or like something thawing where everything had been frozen. He pressed a hand to his sternum, confused by his own pulse. Meanwhile, Hope arrived early, her small car rumbling up the gravel driveway. Fog rolled across the lawn, painting the morning in muted grays and silvers. She stepped out hugging her sweater, whispering a quiet, "Thank you for another day." The air was cold, but her heart felt strangely light. She had no idea her prayer had stirred the very man she hadn't met. Inside, Mrs. Whitaker handed her new tasks with the same clipped tone as always. Laundry room first, then the East Library. Dust is gathering again. Hope nodded, taking the woven basket filled with linens that smelled faintly of lavender. Before she turned away, Mrs. Whitaker added, "And be mindful today. Mr. Hale doesn't like surprises." Hope simply responded, "I'll make sure everything feels peaceful." Jonathan, dressed in a crisp suit but carrying exhaustion in his eyes, descended the stairs slowly. He paused when he saw Hope passing through the hallway with the laundry basket. She didn't notice him at first. Her steps were soft, unhurried, like someone who wasn't trying to outrun anything. When she turned and met his gaze, she immediately lowered her eyes out of respect. "Good morning, sir," she said, voice quiet but steady. Jonathan wasn't used to the staff greeting him unless necessary. He hesitated, as if the simple greeting required translation. Then he nodded, barely perceptible, but still more acknowledgement than he'd given anyone lately. Hope didn't push for more. She simply offered a gentle smile and kept walking toward the laundry room. And for a moment, Jonathan stood still, strangely unsure why her presence didn't irritate him. Hope began sorting linens, humming a soft melody, the same one from the night before. Her voice mixed with the rhythmic sound of folding sheets, creating a simple, honest atmosphere. She loved small tasks like these. They reminded her that even tiny things could be done with love. Every fold felt like a quiet offering, every breath a whispered prayer. "Let this house feel lighter today," she murmured. Her thoughts drifted to the worn Bible she'd found in the guest room. She wondered whose it was, though something in her spirit suspected it belonged to the man who owned the silence here. Hope didn't know Jonathan's story, but she could feel the heaviness in the atmosphere he carried. She prayed again, delicately, like touching a bruise she didn't want to worsen. "God, bring comfort to whoever's hurting." In his office across the hall, Jonathan heard her voice. Not the words, just the melody. Warm, gentle, almost too pure for a house like his. He clenched his jaw, frustrated at how aware he was of her. People had lived here for years without affecting him at all. Why was this different? He closed his laptop, unable to focus on the numbers in front of him. He walked to the window, staring at the gray morning settling over the estate. His reflection looked older than he remembered. Weary eyes, hollow expression, a man who'd lost too much. But beneath that reflection, he sensed something he didn't have a name for. Something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope finished the laundry and headed toward the East Library, a room she hadn't cleaned yet. When she opened the door, she gasped softly at the beauty inside. Towering bookshelves, soft leather chairs, sunlight cutting through tall windows like golden ribbons. A thin layer of dust covered the surfaces as if no one had sat here for months. She placed her supplies down and whispered, "Lord, let this room feel alive again." Then she began to work, careful and reverent. As she dusted a lower shelf, her hand brushed against a picture frame hidden behind stacked books. Curious, she pulled it out gently. It was an old photograph of Jonathan with his wife and young son, all three smiling wide, radiant, full of life. Hope felt her breath catch as she traced the outline of the little boy. A heaviness settled in her heart, intuitive and unexplainable. She placed the frame back exactly where it had been, but differently than before. Facing outward, no longer hidden. She didn't know why it mattered, only that it felt wrong to bury something that once carried joy. As she continued cleaning, she whispered, "Heal the memories that hurt. Highlight the ones that carry love." Her words filled the room like a soft breeze. The shelves seemed to hold them gently. Jonathan walked by the door on his way to the kitchen for coffee. He froze when he heard the faint sound of her humming drifting into the hallway. Something about that melody tugged at the edges of memories he'd locked away. Against his better judgment, he stepped closer. He watched her from the doorway, unseen, silent. Hope wiped the surface of an old desk, unaware she had an audience. There was no performative grace in her movements, just genuine gentleness. Jonathan's eyes caught the picture frame she had repositioned, and his breath hitched. He hadn't looked at that photo in years. Seeing it now felt like someone had reached into his chest. Hope suddenly turned, startled to find him standing there. She immediately straightened up, brushing dust from her hands. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear you." Jonathan's gaze flicked from her to the frame and back. For a long moment he said nothing. Finally, in a voice rough with old grief, he asked, "Why did you move that?" Hope swallowed, choosing her words slowly. "It was turned around," she said softly. "And it looked like something precious." Her eyes held no judgment, only compassion. Jonathan felt those words like a gentle strike. He stepped into the room, staring at the photo as if seeing ghosts. "It was easier not to look at it," he murmured. Hope breathed in slowly, sensing the delicate weight of the moment. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the things that hurt are the things God wants to heal first." Jonathan's eyes snapped to hers, stunned, defensive, shaken. He should have dismissed her, corrected her, reminded her of her position. But the words wouldn't form. Instead, he turned away, voice low and unsteady. "Just leave it where you put it." And he walked out before the ache in his chest betrayed him. Hope watched him go, heart tender. She didn't know what had happened in his life, but she could feel the storm inside him. Her fingers tightened around her cleaning cloth as she whispered another small prayer. "God, melt what grief has frozen." Outside, sunlight crept further into the library, warming a room that hadn't felt lived in for years. The rest of the morning passed with a strange new quiet settling over the Hale estate. Not the heavy, suffocating quiet that usually lingered there, but something lighter, almost hesitant. Hope didn't notice the change, but the house did. The air felt less cold around the edges. Even the hallways seemed to echo differently, as if listening. And Hope moved through it all with the same calm grace she always carried. Jonathan retreated to his office, but work refused to cooperate. Emails blurred. Contracts felt meaningless. Every statistic, every financial projection, every acquisition plan, they all fell flat against the memory of Hope's words. Sometimes the things that hurt are the things God wants to heal first. He hated how those words burrowed into him as if they belonged there. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes, feeling the old exhaustion return. Not the physical kind, the emotional one, the one that settled into bones and stayed. His hand drifted unconsciously toward the drawer where he kept the picture frame identical to the one in the library. But he didn't open it. Couldn't. He closed the laptop instead and stood up abruptly. Downstairs, Hope finished polishing the banister and stepped back to admire her work. She always liked the moment surfaces reflected light again, like watching something forgotten come back to life. A warmth filled her chest, the same feeling she'd had from the moment she entered the estate. Not comfort exactly, but purpose. As if she were meant to be here in ways she didn't yet understand. Mrs. Whitaker approached, holding a list of tasks with her usual briskness. Lunch service will be early today. Mr. Hale isn't feeling well. Hope's eyebrows raised slightly, concern blooming. I hope it's nothing serious, she murmured. Mrs. Whitaker shrugged, but her eyes revealed worry she didn't voice. Hope took the tray of freshly prepared lunch to the kitchen counter, arranging everything with careful hands. She wasn't supposed to deliver meals. That was usually another staff member's job. But today, for reasons known only to the head housekeeper, Hope was asked to bring it up. Her heart fluttered with nerves, unsure how Jonathan would react. Still, she carried the tray, whispering, "Give me peace, Lord." With every step, she approached the office door and knocked softly. For a second, she thought he wouldn't answer. Silence stretched long enough for doubt to appear. Then his low voice said, "Come in." Hope pushed open the door gently, stepping inside with quiet reverence. The room felt heavy, like stepping into the inner chamber of someone's wounded soul. Jonathan looked up from his desk, eyes tired, jaw tense. He seemed startled to see her, though he hid it quickly behind a stoic expression. Mrs. Whitaker asked me to bring your lunch," Hope said, placing the tray down carefully. He nodded, watching her with an unreadable gaze. She moved with grace, not avoiding his eyes but not intruding either. As she arranged the utensils, Hope accidentally brushed the edge of a frame on his desk. It was empty. No photograph inside, just a decorative frame with nothing to protect. Jonathan followed her gaze and instantly looked away. He cleared his throat, but emotion flickered briefly in his eyes. Hope didn't comment. She simply breathed a quiet prayer in her heart. "Is the library finished?" he asked, his voice neutral, but edged with something vulnerable. Hope nodded. "Yes, sir. It's a beautiful room. I'm glad the picture is facing the right way now." Jonathan's breath caught again. She said it gently, without prying. Her compassion disarmed him in ways he couldn't explain. He looked at her as if seeing a rare kind of honesty he'd forgotten existed. Hope took a step back, ready to leave him to his meal. "If you need anything else, I'm just downstairs," she said kindly. He hesitated before replying. Hesitation wasn't in his nature. "Thank you," he said, the words gravelly, as if unused. Hope smiled softly at the unexpected warmth in his voice. As she reached the doorway, Jonathan spoke again, quietly. "Miss Martinez?" She turned, hand still on the doorknob. "Yes, sir?" His eyes held a question he wasn't ready to ask, a memory he wasn't ready to confess. But all he managed was a simple, unguarded, "Why do you pray for strangers?" Hope's heart tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. She stepped closer, her voice gentle and full of quiet certainty. "Because sometimes strangers need prayer the most," she said. "No one knows their battles. No one sees what they carry alone." Jonathan swallowed hard, the truth hitting deeper than he expected. "And you think someone like me needs prayer?" he asked almost bitterly. Hope didn't answer quickly, She honored his pain with a moment of silence. Then she said, "I think everyone who's hurting deserves someone who believes healing is still possible." Her eyes shone with sincerity, not pity. It made Jonathan look away, jaw tight, breath unsteady. Hope stepped back again, offering him a small nod. "I'll let you get back to your work." This time, Jonathan didn't stop her. But when the door closed, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Something inside him felt shaken, but also strangely aware. Hope returned to the hallway, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. She didn't know if she'd said too much or not enough, but she trusted that kindness never returned empty. Jonathan remained in his office, staring at the lunch he had no appetite for, but his mind replayed Hope's words over and over. Everyone who's hurting deserves healing. Outside, sunlight broke through the morning fog and spilled across the Hale estate. It touched the windows, warmed the floors, and seeped into the corners of a house long starved of light. And in one quiet office, a millionaire sat alone, shaken by a maid with more faith than he'd ever seen. He didn't understand her, but for the first time in years, he wished he did. Jonathan didn't leave his office for a long time after Hope walked out. He sat at his desk, elbows resting on the polished wood, hands clasped in front of his mouth. Her words had touched something buried so deep he wasn't sure it still existed. Healing, prayer, strangers. Concepts he'd dismissed for years suddenly felt painfully relevant. He pushed the lunch tray aside untouched and stood up abruptly. The office felt too small, too quiet, too close to the memories he spent years running from. He paced toward the window, the early afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. He had mastered success but failed spectacularly at living. The weight of that truth settled over him with suffocating heaviness. Hope, unaware of the storm inside him, continued her tasks on the first floor. She tidied the parlor, rearranging pillows, wiping dust, restoring calm wherever she went. Her movements carried a quiet rhythm, almost like a prayer expressed through action. She wasn't trying to fix anything, she simply cared. And somehow that made all the difference in the atmosphere. In the kitchen, Mrs. Whitaker watched Hope work, her expression unreadable. "You're settling in quickly," she remarked, more thoughtful than critical. Hope smiled softly. "I just try to bring peace where I can." Mrs. Whitaker hesitated, then said, "This house hasn't felt peaceful in a long time." Hope's gaze warmed with empathy, but she didn't probe further. Upstairs, Jonathan opened the hallway closet and pulled out a dusty box. He wasn't sure what compelled him, something between impulse and yearning. Inside the box lay photographs he hadn't touched in years, the ones he'd shoved away because looking at them was like ripping open a wound. His fingers trembled as he lifted the first picture. It was his son's drawing, childish strokes of bright crayons, a stick figure family holding hands. "Daddy, Mommy, me," written in uneven letters above their smiling faces. Jonathan's breath caught, grief tightening his throat like a fist. 12 years had passed, but the ache was as fresh as ever. He sank to the floor, the picture resting against his knees. Hope suddenly felt a heaviness in her spirit, a tug, subtle but unmistakable. She paused in the hallway, pressing a hand briefly to her chest. It wasn't fear, nor sadness. It was a prompt, a sense that someone in the house was hurting at that very moment. "Lord, lead me," she whispered. Jonathan's composure cracked fully as memories stormed him. His wife's laughter, his son running through these hallways, the accident, the phone call, the funeral. His heart had been a grave ever since. A sound escaped him. Low, broken, involuntary. It was the sound of a man who had carried too much alone. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, but the tears pushed through anyway. 12 years of locked pain refused to stay hidden. He felt himself unraveling on the hallway floor. Hope, carrying fresh linens toward the staircase, froze when she heard it. It was faint, almost drowned out by the quiet house, but it was unmistakable. A quiet sob, a man breaking. She followed the sound softly, respectfully, like approaching sacred ground. Her heart beat quickly, but compassion steadied her steps. She turned the corner and saw him sitting on the floor, shoulders shaking. He wasn't the powerful millionaire the town whispered about. He was a broken father, a grieving husband. Hope's breath trembled, her chest tightening with empathy. She didn't rush toward him, didn't intrude, didn't make noise. She simply came closer and knelt a respectful distance away. Jonathan didn't notice her at first, lost in the wave of pain he hadn't allowed himself to feel. But then he sensed her presence. Light, gentle, unwavering. He lifted his head, eyes red, breathing unsteady. Their gazes met, and for the first time he didn't hide behind coldness. He was simply human, and hurting. Hope's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry you're carrying something so heavy." She didn't ask what happened. She didn't force him to speak. She just acknowledged the weight. Jonathan swallowed hard, wiping his face quickly, embarrassed. "I didn't mean for anyone to see this," he said, voice cracking. Hope shook her head tenderly. "You don't have to hide pain to be strong." Her words were gentle but firm, truth spoken with compassion. He stared at her, unsure how she could see straight through him. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but sacred. Hope folded her hands gently on her lap, not touching him, not overwhelming him. "If you want me to leave, I will," she said calmly. "But if you need someone to sit nearby while you breathe, I can do that too." Jonathan exhaled shakily, a tear slipping down unnoticed. For the first time in 12 years, he didn't push someone away. He didn't shut down or retreat behind anger. He just nodded. Small, imperceptible, but real. Hope stayed, her presence offering quiet strength instead of pressure. And in that silent hallway, something powerful shifted. Jonathan felt a strange relief. Not because the pain was gone, but because for the first time he wasn't facing it alone. Hope didn't fill the silence with chatter or questions. She simply sat with him, her presence steady and sincere. It was the closest thing to comfort he'd felt in years. Down the hall, the late afternoon sunlight poured through a window, casting warm gold across the floor. It illuminated the forgotten drawings, the dust, the grief, and the fragile hope being reborn. Jonathan closed his eyes, breathing deeply, letting the moment settle into his soul. Hope bowed her head gently, praying silently for the man beside her. And in that quiet hallway, heaven leaned close. The sun dipped lower as Jonathan finally gathered the strength to rise from the hallway floor. Hope stood with him, steady but not intrusive, offering presence instead of pressure. He brushed dust from his trousers, avoiding her gaze for a moment as he regained composure. His breathing evened, though his eyes still held traces of the storm. It was clear he wasn't used to being seen in such vulnerability. "I shouldn't have let you witness that," he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. Hope shook her head gently. "Pain isn't shameful, Mr. Hale." He swallowed hard, jaw tightening at the unexpected grace in her voice. "No one has said that to me in a long time," he admitted quietly. Hope gave a soft, warm look, a look that didn't pity, only understood. They walked down the hallway in silence, the kind that comforted rather than strained. Jonathan moved slower than usual, as if emotional weight still clung to him. Hope kept a respectful distance, though her heart remained tuned to his pain. He finally stopped near the window where sunlight still lingered. The golden glow softened the lines of grief around his face. "You prayed yesterday," he said suddenly, not looking at her. Hope turned slightly, unsure where the conversation was going. "Yes," she answered gently. "I pray everywhere I go." Jonathan's fingers tapped on the window frame. "A restless habit. And you prayed for me." Hope's breath caught, but she didn't deny it. "I prayed for whoever lived here," she said tenderly. "Someone who carried something too heavy for one heart alone." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly as if the truth stung. "You had no idea who I was," he said. Hope stepped a little closer, keeping her voice soft. "You're not defined by your reputation, sir. You're defined by what your heart still aches for." Jonathan exhaled shakily, that unfamiliar warmth returning to his chest. He wasn't used to being spoken to like a human, not a billionaire. Her sincerity disarmed him more than any confrontation ever had. They stood in the corridor, both sensing an unspoken fragility between them. Jonathan finally asked, voice low, "Why do you care?" Hope paused, searching his eyes with quiet compassion. "Because grief isolates people," she whispered, "and no one deserves to live inside their own silence forever." The words pierced him, hitting the deepest parts he never voiced. He looked away quickly, blinking hard against memories rising too fast. Hope didn't press further. She simply stood beside him, a steady presence. Jonathan finally whispered, "I don't remember the last time someone cared without wanting something." Hope felt her heart soften even more. With deliberate gentleness, she replied, "God doesn't send people to take. Sometimes he sends them to hold the pieces gently until you can breathe again." Jonathan's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering in his eyes. Her words weren't dramatic. They were healing, and healing felt foreign, almost frightening. He turned toward her just enough to meet her gaze. "You don't even know my story," he said, voice thick. Hope nodded. "I don't need to know it to care." Jonathan inhaled slowly, as if absorbing that truth. He felt walls tremble, the same walls he'd built with determination, grief, and fear. Hope's presence alone made cracks appear. A sudden vibration from his phone broke the moment. Jonathan looked down and stiffened instantly. His lawyer was calling. He declined the call, but his mood shifted sharply, like clouds covering a fragile sunbeam. Hope sensed the tension and stepped back respectfully. "You don't have to talk about it," she said. Jonathan looked torn between wanting to remain open and wanting to retreat again. "There are things in my past, things I don't revisit," he said, voice low. Hope nodded with deep understanding. "Some pain takes time," she murmured. "And God never rushes the healing of a wound he cares about." Jonathan stared at her, struck by the quiet power in her words. For years, people around him had approached his grief with discomfort or impatience. Hope approached it with reverence, and like his pain mattered, like it wasn't something to sweep away. It left him feeling seen in a way he hadn't in 12 years, a feeling both terrifying and strangely comforting. He cleared his throat softly. "Would you stay for a minute?" Hope blinked, surprised by the request, but nodded. Jonathan walked toward the library, the room she'd cleaned earlier, and paused at the doorway. He entered slowly, almost reverently, eyes settling on the picture frame she had turned outward. Hope followed quietly, watching the way his shoulders reacted to the memory. He approached the frame and picked it up with trembling fingers. It was the first time he had held that image in a decade. Hope could feel his grief without him saying a word. Jonathan whispered, "This was the last day we were all together." The sentence cracked on the way out. Hope's eyes watered, moved by the depth of love and loss she could sense. She clasped her hands gently, grounding her heart in empathy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Jonathan closed his eyes, holding the frame like a fragile piece of himself. "It's been 12 years," he murmured. Hope took a breath, voice calm yet full of truth. 12 years is long in human time," she said softly. "But in God's time, healing can begin in a single moment." Jonathan looked up at her, eyes shining with unshed tears. And for the first time, he didn't hide them. Jonathan didn't sleep that night, not because of nightmares, but because something inside him had shifted. He lay awake, replaying every moment, Hope kneeling at a distance, her quiet presence, her gentle words. He hadn't opened his heart in years, yet with her, the walls didn't feel as strong. It scared him, but part of him didn't want to run this time. At dawn, he stepped into the kitchen for coffee and froze when he saw her. Hope stood near the window, pouring tea into a small mug she brought from home. The rising sun softened her silhouette, warm light haloing around her, as if heaven had placed her there on purpose. She turned when she sensed him, offering a calm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." He cleared his throat, unsure why speaking felt suddenly complicated. "Morning," he replied, softer than he intended. Hope stepped aside so he could reach the coffee machine, but her presence lingered like comfort in the room. Silence stretched between them, not heavy, just unfamiliar. Jonathan finally whispered, "Thank you for yesterday." Hope didn't pretend not to understand. She simply nodded with a compassion that made his chest tighten. "You don't owe me thanks," she said gently. "Grief is sacred. I'm honored you trusted me enough not to hide." Jonathan stared at her, stunned by the purity of her sincerity. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up reluctantly, another call from his lawyer. Hope noticed the tension flood his shoulders instantly, the way his jaw tightened. She didn't pry, but concern deepened in her eyes. Jonathan declined the call and set the phone down harder than he meant to. "Bad news?" she asked softly. Jonathan hesitated, torn between silence and truth. "It's about the accident," he finally said, the words sharp, reluctant. Hope's heart tightened, but she remained steady. "You don't have to explain." He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. "There's a hearing coming up," he said. "The driver who caused it? He's appealing his sentence." Hope felt grief ripple off him like a bitter wind. Jonathan's voice hardened. "He wants a shorter punishment." Hope's breath caught. The cruelty of that felt unbearable. "How can they reopen something so painful?" she whispered, more to herself than him. Jonathan gave a hollow laugh with no humor. "Money, loopholes, people who don't care what they've destroyed." His eyes darkened with a blend of sorrow and fury. Hope stepped closer, though still respectful. "Did you ever get closure?" she asked quietly. Jonathan looked at her, something exhausted, yet honest in his gaze. "I don't believe in closure," he said bitterly. "I believe in surviving what you can't change." Hope nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. But her voice, though soft, carried courage. "Surviving isn't the same as living, Mr. Hale." He froze, the truth hitting him like a quiet shock. No one had ever spoken to him like that, with truth wrapped in tenderness. A long silence grew between them as morning light filled the kitchen. Jonathan's eyes softened just a fraction. "I don't know how to live anymore," he admitted, the most honest thing he'd said in years. Hope breathed out slowly, moved by his vulnerability. "You don't have to know. Healing starts with breathing again." Jonathan's throat tightened at her words. Painfully true, painfully gentle. He looked down, gripping the counter as if grounding himself. Hope watched him with a heart that wanted nothing but to ease his burden. "I can pray for you," she whispered. Only then did he look up, startled. "No one has prayed for me in 12 years, he said, voice raw. Hope's eyes warmed. "Then maybe it's time someone does." Jonathan swallowed, shaken by how much he wanted to accept. But before he could answer, another call buzzed, this time louder, more insistent. He silenced it with frustration burning in his eyes. "Take the call," Hope encouraged softly. "You don't have to face it alone." Jonathan stared at her, absorbing the quiet strength in her words. Then he stepped out to answer, heart pounding, past rising like a storm. Hope bowed her head, praying silently as he left. Minutes later, Jonathan returned pale, drained, different. His hands trembled slightly. The conversation had shaken him deeply. Hope stepped toward him, worry knitting her brow. "What happened?" she whispered. Jonathan's voice cracked as he answered. "They want me to testify," he said. "Face the man who took my family, relive everything." Hope felt the weight of those words cut through the room. She reached out instinctively, stopping short of touching his arm, respecting boundaries yet standing with him. "Jonathan," she breathed, his name slipping out softly for the first time. He lifted his eyes to hers, pain swimming beneath the surface. "I can't do it," he whispered. "I don't have the strength." Hope shook her head gently, her voice steady and strong. "You don't need strength you don't have." She held his gaze with unwavering compassion. "God will give you the strength you lack." Jonathan's lips parted, breath trembling. Her faith both comforted and terrified him. Hope continued, voice like a calm wind after the storm. "And if you let me, I'll stand with you in prayer." Jonathan didn't answer, but he didn't look away. His heart, cracked open by grief and touched by grace, fought a battle he could no longer ignore. Hope felt it. The shift, the breaking, the quiet surrender beginning. She whispered words only heaven heard. "Help him breathe, Lord. Help him rise." The day of the hearing approached faster than Jonathan wanted. Each sunrise felt like a countdown, each night a reminder of everything he feared facing. but Hope's presence softened the edges of his dread a little more each day. She didn't pry, didn't pressure. She simply stayed, and something in him began to trust that staying mattered. On the morning before the hearing, Jonathan wandered through the mansion restlessly. He ended up in the East Library, the room Hope had brought back to life. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, dust motes dancing like tiny whispers of peace. He walked toward the picture frame again, fingers brushing the glass. His wife's smile felt like a memory and a wound. Hope entered quietly, carrying fresh linens for the nearby guest rooms. She paused when she saw him standing there, framed by sunlight and sorrow. Her heart tugged, but she approached without disrupting the fragility of the moment. "Couldn't sleep again?" she asked gently. Jonathan didn't respond at first. He just nodded. "You're scared," Hope added softly. Not accusing, simply naming truth. Jonathan let out a shaky breath. Terrified. Hope didn't offer cliches or quick fixes. She simply stood beside him. "You don't have to face it alone," she whispered. "I'll be praying the whole time." He turned toward her, eyes weary but drawn. "You make it sound possible," he murmured. Hope smiled gently. "It is. Strength doesn't come before the battle. It comes during it." Jonathan absorbed the words like sunlight after a long winter. He didn't believe easily, but her faith felt real enough to lean on. A moment of silence passed, warm and strangely peaceful. Jonathan's gaze drifted to her hands, steady, gentle, grounding. A softness he hadn't felt in 12 years rose inside him like a tide. He exhaled, a breath that trembled with old grief and new hope. Hope's eyes lifted to his, open and kind. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan said suddenly. Hope nodded, her expression encouraging. "Why do you trust God so much?" he asked, a question soaked in longing. Hope took a moment, her eyes shimmering with lived truth. "Because I've seen him show up in places no one else could reach." Jonathan felt those words sink deep into his chest. He stared at her as if trying to understand a language he once knew. "And you think he can reach me?" he whispered. Hope's smile widened just a little. "I think he already is." Jonathan inhaled sharply, as if the realization pierced him. They stood in silence that felt nothing like emptiness. It felt full, of questions, healing, possibility. Hope adjusted the linens in her arms, grounding herself in the moment. Jonathan's gaze lingered on her, something warm flickering in his expression. A warmth he didn't recognize at first. She turned to leave, but halfway to the door she stopped. "Jonathan?" she said softly, using his first name again. He lifted his eyes, startled by the intimacy of the sound. "You survived the worst day of your life," she whispered, "but God hasn't finished writing your story." Jonathan didn't know when his throat tightened or why tears blurred his vision. Hope's words carried the kind of truth he hadn't allowed himself to hear in a decade. "Do you really believe that?" he asked, voice unsteady. Hope nodded, her eyes shining with compassion and certainty. "I believe healing begins the moment we stop running." A quiet, fragile moment settled between them, thick with grace. Jonathan's lips parted slightly, his chest rising with a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Hope gave him one last warm glance before turning toward the door. And then, something unexpected happened. Something small, almost invisible, but miraculous. Jonathan felt a faint pull in his chest, like a thread being tugged loose. His lips twitched, just a little, hesitant and unsure. He didn't even notice at first, but Hope did. She froze, eyes widening softly, heart swelling as she witnessed it. A tiny, fragile smile. The first in 12 long years. Hope didn't gasp, didn't call attention to it, didn't overwhelm the sacred moment. She simply let her eyes soften and whispered, "There it is." Jonathan blinked, confused. "What?" Hope's voice was warm, glowing, reverent. "Light," she said. "Your heart remembered what it feels like." Jonathan's breath caught. He lifted a hand to his mouth. Stunned, he hadn't intended to smile. It had slipped through the cracks without permission. But Hope wasn't shocked. She was moved, deeply, tenderly. Her heart whispered gratitude to heaven, because she knew that wasn't her doing and it was grace. Jonathan whispered, "I don't know how that happened." Hope smiled softly. "You don't have to. Healing doesn't announce itself. It just begins." He stared at her, overwhelmed, unsteady, changed. She stepped a little closer, voice gentle. "You're not alone anymore, Jonathan." For the first time in 12 years, he believed it. The morning of the hearing arrived with a cold wind sweeping through the Georgia hills. Jonathan stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. His reflection carried a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and something new, a fragile courage he didn't recognize. He had faced boardrooms, crises, and billion-dollar decisions. But nothing compared to this. Nothing compared to facing the man who changed his life forever. Downstairs, Hope waited near the foyer, hands clasped, heart beating with prayer. She wasn't dressed for court, she was dressed for work, but she was there for him. When Jonathan descended the staircase, she looked up slowly. Her expression held no pressure, no expectation, only support. "You ready?" she asked softly. Jonathan exhaled shakily. "No," he admitted honestly. Hope smiled gently. "Then we'll ask God to walk ahead of you." He swallowed hard, feeling her words settle into the cracks of his fear. No one had ever stood with him like this, not even before the tragedy. Hope brought a kind of presence that rebuilt where life had torn down. Before he left, Hope reached out her hand, hesitating at first. He hesitated too, then placed his hand in hers, the connection grounding both of them. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Lord, give him strength no memory can take away." Jonathan's breath trembled, eyes lowering as the prayer washed over him. It steadied him in a way nothing else could. At the courthouse, Jonathan felt the air thicken with old ghosts. The marble floors echoed with memories he tried to bury. Lawyers murmured legal jargon, distant and cold, but his heartbeat was loudest of all. He almost turned back, almost ran. Then he remembered Hope's hand, her words, her faith. Inside the courtroom, the man responsible stood at the far end, older, thinner, remorse etched into his features. Jonathan's chest tightened violently at the sight. Grief rose like a tide, threatening to drown him again. His lawyer leaned over. "You don't have to speak if you can't," he whispered. But Jonathan shook his head slowly. When called to the stand, his legs felt heavy, unsteady. He took a breath, the same breath Hope prayed for. Her voice echoed in his mind. "Strength comes during the battle." Jonathan lifted his eyes and looked directly at the man who changed everything. For the first time, he didn't look away. "I lost my family that day," he began, voice shaking. "My wife, my son, my joy, my smile." The courtroom fell silent, every word carrying years of buried agony. But grief turned me into a man who died but kept walking. A tear slipped down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it. He continued, voice trembling yet honest. "I came here today thinking I had no strength left, but someone reminded me that healing doesn't mean forgetting." Hope's face filled his mind like a light through fog. "It means letting your heart breathe again, and even when it hurts." A murmur of emotion rippled through the room. Jonathan looked directly at the man responsible, eyes filled not with rage, but with profound sorrow. "I won't say I forgive you," he whispered. "I'm not there yet." His voice cracked, raw and vulnerable. "But I'm choosing today not to let hatred define the rest of my life." A collective breath filled the courtroom. When Jonathan stepped down, knees weak, his lawyer placed a steadying hand on his back. "You did something powerful today," he said quietly. But Jonathan knew the truth. He hadn't done it alone. He hadn't stood on his own strength. Hope's faith had carried him further than he could have walked himself. When he returned to the mansion hours later, the sky was painted with soft sunset colors. Hope was polishing the entry table, but the moment she saw him, she stopped. Jonathan didn't speak. He simply walked to her, eyes glossy with exhaustion and relief. "It's done," he whispered. Hope's shoulders softened, her heart swelling. He exhaled shakily. "I faced him." Hope nodded gently. "I knew you would." Jonathan's voice dropped to a raw confession. "I only made it because your prayers held me together." Hope's eyes filled. But she didn't look away. "God held you," she whispered. "I just stood near the healing." Jonathan's throat tightened as he stepped closer. "You have no idea what you've done for me." Hope shook her head softly. "I didn't heal you, Jonathan. I just reminded you your heart wasn't dead." Her words struck him like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And for the second time, his lips curved. A quiet, trembling smile. They stood in the foyer as golden light filtered through tall windows, warming the house that had known too much coldness. Jonathan looked around slowly, taking in the space with new eyes. "This house feels different," he whispered. Hope nodded. "Healing changes places too." Jonathan swallowed, eyes returning to her. He took a breath, vulnerability clear in every line of his expression. "Hope, would you stay?" Her heart fluttered, not from romance but from purpose. "Stay?" she echoed gently. Jonathan nodded, voice trembling with sincerity. "Not as staff," he said softly, "but as someone I trust. Someone who helped me remember the man I was." Hope felt tears gather, not of sadness but of divine timing. "Jonathan," she whispered, overwhelmed by the depth of his gratitude. "I'll stay as long as God keeps writing your healing." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words settle deep inside. When he opened them again, something steadier lived there. Courage, gratitude, and newfound light. Hope smiled through tears, sensing heaven every bit in that moment. The house that once held echoes now held promise, and the man who hadn't smiled in 12 years finally had something worth living for again. In the weeks following the hearing, the Hale mansion transformed in ways no decorator could ever replicate. It wasn't the rooms that changed, it was the atmosphere. Light lingered longer, silence felt softer. Hope's presence, steady and gracious, carried warmth into places untouched for years. Even the staff whispered that the house breathed differently now. Jonathan began waking earlier, opening curtains, letting sunlight flood the spaces he once kept dim. He ate meals at the dining table instead of his office. He even walked the gardens again, the same ones he abandoned after the tragedy. Every step felt strange, like learning to live all over. But Hope walked beside him with a heart that understood. They talked sometimes, not about grief or pain, but about small things. Laughter didn't feel intrusive anymore. It felt possible. Jonathan still had wounds, still had nights where the past threatened to suffocate him. But healing wasn't about perfection. It was about breath returning slowly. And Hope's quiet faith made every breath a reminder that God had not abandoned him. One afternoon, as golden light spilled through the living room windows, Jonathan paused mid-sentence. Hope looked up, unsure what made him stop. He smiled, not small this time, not hesitant, but full, warm, alive. It reached his eyes, softening every line grief had carved. Hope's breath caught as her heart whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Jonathan let out a soft laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "I never thought I'd see this day," he said. Hope smiled tenderly. "God writes endings we can't imagine." Jonathan stepped closer, the weight in his shoulders finally lighter. "And he uses people we never expect." Hope lowered her gaze, humbled. "I'm just grateful he let me be here." Jonathan lifted her chin gently, his touch reverent. "You reminded me I still had a life worth living," he whispered. Hope's eyes warmed. "You had a heart worth healing." And in that moment, hope and restoration filled the room like sunlight. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, gentle, peaceful, almost like a blessing. Inside, a man once broken stood steady again, and a woman who carried faith like a banner watched a miracle unfold day by day. Healing didn't come all at once, but it came. Faithfully, quietly, completely. Hope remained at the mansion, not out of obligation, but out of purpose. And Jonathan continued to rise from the ashes of 12 silent years. The past remained a scar, but not a prison. His smile became a promise, a testament that God still rebuilds hearts. And every time he smiled, Hope knew heaven had the final word. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Leave a comment below. God still heals broken hearts. Your engagement helps us bring more stories of redemption, faith, and second chances. See you in the next Redeemed Hearts story.